So just as you were talking, I was sort of flashing back to, I listened to the interview with you and your co-author on new books in, I forget which, it wasn't new books in French studies, but it was
something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, who remembers?
And so just to focus on the and beyond part of this, it seemed to me, sorry I haven't read it, but it seemed to me that in hearing you discuss your book, that it's not aimed simply at other professors. And
no, not at all.
And that seems like a big aspect of the and beyond part. It's not one at all we've been talking about, but when we look at who are our books aimed at, this is an avenue to consider.
Can I quickly respond to that? Because I'm going to tell you about an experience that I think is fundamental to some of the problems that we have in French history. At our sister conference in French Historical Studies, I was on a panel, roundtable, representing both Annette and I, since we're co-authors in a lot of these projects. And the theme was writing history for a wider audience. And after I gave my little thing, the microphone was handed to an older colleague who had been a mentor of mine after my dissertation director died for many years. And he stood up and he said to me, "You know, Gail, you used to write serious, meaningful, important history. And I wish everybody in this room would urge you to go back to that, because I will never understand this stuff you write now. And I want you to know you have lost a reader. I would never read what you're writing now or buy your book." And this was after I had made a plea for exactly that issue. I think that we as public scholars have a responsibility, not just in what we do in the classroom, but in what we write, in many ways, to do the kind of things Annette's talking about with reaching out to our community, to exactly. I think that this is really the issue, is we have to realize how can we pull in who we're talking about. I'm done for the moment.
But just to briefly respond, though, I think, too, we have two problems, right? We have the students who are not engaged, but we also have the students who come in thinking they are going to change the world. And one of the big things that we do is I think one of the big issues is figuring out how to channel that in a way that is, you know, analytically responsible and ethically responsible and all of that. So perhaps we could address that question more.
Actually, I just want to follow up on what you're saying, because I teach at a Jesuit school as well. We have a big core. The idea of social justice is absolutely central to the educational mission, and I think that our president would say we're supposed to be teaching values, just to go back to what Paul said.
Definitely.
Yeah, and there is very much a notion of, well, what we might call in other contexts, noblesse oblige. For these students, it's the privilege of being educated in a private institution, imparts to them an obligation to give back, and that's very much the way it's framed. And a number of colleagues and I have been talking over the years about the way in which that sets up a power dynamic of privilege and unprivileged that we want in our classrooms to be deconstructing and historicizing. And sometimes the institution actually works against that goal, because I remember you saying that one of your jobs is to break your students' hearts by teaching them that they can't actually save the world, and nor should they necessarily be trying. Am I paraphrasing that right? Yeah. So I wonder if other people have experiences that you know, draw on that tension between being skeptical historians and encouraging this kind of engagement that we are all talking about.
Well, I guess I would say something that goes in the other direction, which is that I think it is a tension. So it's possible that if all of my students were wild optimists, I would think it was my job to break their hearts. But in fact, where I teach, many of my students are deeply cynical pessimists. I feel that they break my heart. And if there's anything I want to give them, it's actually a little more possibility that they can act in the world and not any less than they already have. So I think finding the balance between those two things may be different from place to place.
I would agree. with both statements, but one of the resolutions.
We need to get you on a microphone.
That good? I would agree with both statements, but say that one of the goals that the institution can have to help meet that is by diversifying the community of scholars as well as the community of students. Because as soon as you do change the balance up a little bit and bring in different voices, then the kind of absurdist humanitarian statements that can come out of one student's mouth in the context of the students they're supposed to be saving, you know, sitting on the other side of the room becomes really evident, as well as the agency that already exists among those students who are often seen as the objects of humanitarian endeavors. So I think that's really a really great place to have that conversation.
Yeah, I should just say that where I teach, that is also an important piece of the community. It isn't all, you know, upper middle class white kids who are doing this. But there is a kind of, I don't know, West and the rest ethic that gets built into it that I think is more problematic. And Lloyd, did you want to respond to this? Go.
Well, I wanted to say just a couple of things. One, on the issue of beyond, I teach at a state university, and I feel over the years I've been there that our engagement with publics outside the university has definitely become a greater emphasis. And I don't know if that counts as this kind of teaching, but you know, doing seminars with high school teachers, doing programs with alumni, doing things where you can show a connection between issues, not only pedagogical issues, but issues in people's lives and French history. So that's one thing. I just think we can't think only of the traditional classroom as where we are engaging people. And I appreciate your point. I heard you speak at that meeting. I don't remember someone saying such a dreadful thing. Well, may I apologize for the old battle axes that are still out there before they pass away completely. But no, I mean, that's sort of a self-defeating point of view, and I feel that all the more when, you know, we're under attack. Why teach history? And I feel almost a passionate desire to try to articulate the value of history not only to our students but to people outside the university. Now, the challenge, I think, is that French history in particular, and it has to do partly with the way I teach it because I'm an intellectual historian, and I love talking about Voltaire and Rousseau and, you know, engaging complicated writers in some way, but showing that when these people write about the world, they are also engaging issues that make a difference to your life. And I think one of the problems that French history in particular, or French culture has, is it has an image of elitism promoted and perhaps by French traditions, if the truth be told. I know are we being recorded in saying this? I don't want to jeopardize my relation to French culture, but I do know that this image, you know, it's not just fine wines and perfume. It's sort of like, oh, you read about, you know, French writers? Yeah, they're really cool. But I think, and this comes back to Jen's point, you know, if students live in a world where everything is media, everything is, you know, the latest app on your phone, we are becoming so radical by saying, here is a text, and I'm not saying that that's the only way to teach, but getting students to realize, wow, this is interesting too. And it has to be somehow interactive, but I feel like trying to engage students who are not from the white upper class and to help them see these issues are part of your life too. I think if there's any challenge that we face, it is to think not only about interpreting to outside the university, but to connecting to students on two levels. One, that writing and documents and serious systematic thought is an engaged activity. And secondly, you don't have to be from the white elite to see the value of these issues. And I don't have an answer, but I think insofar as we think self-consciously about that every day in our teaching, we are engaging in ways that we can, you know. So.
Just a quick comment of agreement first and partial disagreement. I agree that stories, and I have found this effective in my French history seminar, that stories are essential, and it's a way that I use to ignite the interest, and many of us have done this, we show film clips, we show, the film clips from the Algerian War, we show Revoir les Enfants, to get started into World War II, and so we all, I think, do these things. I have found film clips to be an effective means of getting the story, but one point of disagreement is that the means by which stories are delivered today are digital, and I lean very heavily on the digital. I apologize to the notion of the feeling like a dinosaur and such, but it is very challenging. But in terms of engaging students, I actually find that the student who won't raise his or her hand in the classroom will respond online. So a lot of my courses are taught hybrid and partial lecture and then partial online. And I've been very surprised because I didn't come into that with any enthusiasm at all. But the shy student will respond to a forum, whereas in the classroom that student would not. So those are my 2 points, that we need to use digital technology to, not to distance from each other, but as a means to actually come together and engage people. And frankly, 20-somethings, this is their world. So we've got to become, and I'm very encouraged by my own students to become very, very technologically aware. It's my world now.
Yeah, can I add just a comment too? The issue about stories I found very interesting recently. I've been teaching a course on the Atlantic slave trade, and I've tried to flip it where instead of me telling them the story, they have to create the story. And I have them read a set of readings, about 6-7 articles about different aspects of slave life. And then they're broken into groups, and they have to then create a narrative, about a 15-minute presentation about, I'll give the age, where the slave was born, etc. And they have to figure out, based upon those readings, okay, would this slave be one likely to run away? But they have to create the story, and I found they become very engaged. They create actually some fascinating stories. They're fiction based on a historical text, but it seems to really get them to think about how they are part of creating this story and this history.
Yeah, I actually was going to tell one of David's stories, which which is that in a recent seminar that he taught online, he found that the students became more actively engaged with the reading than they sometimes are in the classroom, because they had that anonymity of putting it out there on a message board for others to respond to without having to look at them. But I'm one of the dinosaurs too, and I have the luxury of almost never teaching a class larger than 25 students. And one very simple thing that I've been doing along with colleagues at Butler for 25 years now, since we began a writing across the curriculum program, is to ask students to do what we call overnight writes. When I give them something to read, I say, look, tomorrow or Wednesday when you come back to class, you got to bring a paragraph responding to the reading. That gets the discussion going. It forces them to think a little bit overnight about what they've read. And then I don't always collect them, and I tell them this at the beginning of the semester. It drives them crazy because they've written it. Damn it, they want me to take it. But I take about 1/3 of them, and I don't grade them. I just check them off. But as I go through and read the paragraphs, I look for the comments that didn't come out in class so that I can bring them back in the next class period and get them out there on the table for all of us to talk about. And that works pretty well. And it sometimes brings the student who at the beginning of the semester is quiet and shy into the conversation as the semester goes along. I think for those moments when we all get discouraged about what we're doing and trying to do in the classroom, 2 or 3 years ago I read Natalie Davis's book, A Passion for History, the conversation between Natalie and Denis Crouzet, which I think brings wonderfully alive why we do what we do and the ways in which we can make connections between the distant past and the very real issues of the 21st century. And I gave this book to my students the last time I taught historiography at Butler, and it was useful there too. It provoked a lot of discussion. They really enjoyed it. Engaging and lively book. You're not done yet.
No, I'm not. I just wanted to add one thing about digital. I've used digital the forums, and I sometimes use them. I've taught hybrid courses. There's actually a lot of pressure in our school to go in that direction. My concern with it, however, is I don't like to let the shy ones off the hook, because I do really feel that our students are, not all of them, but many of them are under-socialized, that they spend too much time staring at a screen. So I make them do small group things where they do role playing. I make them do things, and I really do try to push them, because I don't want them to think that they can live their lives just communicating online.
I like it. I like it back here. I want to second that for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is the importance, again, not only of students just learning how to present themselves and present an idea, to speak with spontaneity or to present in some planned way, but also so important to see and to learn how to listen to people that they otherwise wouldn't listen to. So, you know, the kind, you know, in a political history course, an economic history course, frankly, in my school, I'm at Bard, by the way, the men will come forward very aggressively at a certain point and talk over top of the women, and shut other shyer men down, and all kinds of stuff like that. And so if I'm there to help with that, they can learn that that's not good social behavior. And likewise, they can be surprised to learn that a person of color, for example, may have a different set of life experiences that influence how they read the text. And with, again, a little bit of support, I can help with the translation so that they can understand that the people who come from a different class or from a different background, racial background, are saying something just as important as they are. So I think that the classroom space can be really vital in a way that what's happening, I mean, it's not, you know, an alternative to, it's just one more way of doing things, but I don't think we should give it up if we at all have the leisure to do that.
I could just, is this on? I could just agree with all of that. And I know that a few years ago I participated in a teaching seminar at the Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies, and it was all about sort of how to teach a class. And I learned all of these techniques there that I've subsequently tried and found out that the students just love them. And one is simply passing out quotes to the whole class, and the quote is cut in half, and you have to find your partner. So it involves, I love classes that are noisy and exciting, and so it involves everybody getting up and moving around because they have to find the other half of their quote. And in the meantime, they begin to talk to someone who sits on the other side of the class from them. Another fun exercise was to take chronology. I mean, you know, everybody hates chronology, and historians never want to talk about dates, but unfortunately students have no sense of chronology at all. And so to take something like the French Revolution and to make you know, you got 35 students in the class, to make 35 events, and then you pass out all these pieces of paper, and then they have to line themselves up in chronological order. And so it gets noisy and loud because they all have to figure out where they fall in line in terms of chronology. But all of these things I was very skeptical of. I mean, I'm old-fashioned. I'm a dinosaur like Gail. I'd rather be up in front of the class listening to myself talk. And all of these things just have been wonderful. And then, of course, they all come back in student opinion surveys and teaching evaluations by, you know, she lets us get up and move around, and it's so fun and exciting. And I was really surprised to see it come back into the teaching evaluations, but it's worked fantastically, so that then I've develop these other things where I give students problems and put them in 3 groups, and then they've got to solve the problem in 15 minutes or less. And it's almost impossible to do, but again, it gets them speaking to each other, and so it begins to surmount some of these social issues that have become more problematic in the last 10 years than they ever were before.
Yeah. So I'm not a dinosaur. I'm in the primordial soup. I don't let them use PowerPoint. Where's the... This is it. Hi. You see, I'm very techno-challenged. That's why I don't allow my students to do it. But I just want to mention one thing that has nothing to do with the history of France. It's my history of medicine survey. And at the very end,
It's the students who have to sort of bring us into the 21st century, so they each choose a topic that's relevant for today. It's some very pressing medical, ethical issue, or technological issue, or cloning, or whatever. I give them a bunch of things that they can choose. And they used to do these PowerPoints that were either bullets of exactly what they were saying, or so sexy that the mosaics are coming in from the corners, and I'm looking at everybody out there, and they're just kind of. So about 5 years ago, I said, no PowerPoint. Everybody has to prepare a handout for the class. Each student, so it's a class of 25, 30. So the person speaking has to have a handout, and they can put something, an image or something on the handout if they desperately need a graph or a map or something evocative that's, pictorial. But they have to just talk. And they were aghast the first time I said this, because they were taking the class because friends had taken it, and they said it was groovy. Well, no. So, okay. Well, but what has happened, because I've now done this 5 times, they practice, because they know there's a huge grade for that oral presentation, right? They meet other people. They'll talk to the person who's behind them or next to them in the class, and they'll say, are you ready with your oral? And they'll say, no. Could we get together? And so the kind of thing you were talking about, it's not so much a moving around noisy in the class, but what I learn, and I see it on the evals, and some of them also do the kind of true confessions with me, is that they meet each other, they talk with each other, they're in this together, and they really need to think about how to present something, how to give a talk. And so far, it's worked very well. I mean, they think I'm some kind of Luddite, but I don't care. It's socializing them. It is. Plus, I think they need to learn how to give a talk, whatever they're going to be when they grow up. Who's next?
Oh, you can just hold on to it until, there are several of those floating around. So I guess I want to maybe shift gears a little bit. One of the issues that we wanted to talk about is the ways in which teaching French history and maybe some of these more global courses enables fruitful reflection, this is our term here, for current issues in American life. And the course that I teach that got me interested in this panel is a class on the veil in the modern world. And of course, we all probably teach something on the veiling controversies in France. But in that class, it's a seminar in our honors program, and it's so interesting. The students all come in fired up with anger and over the injustice that women are forced to wear hijab in various places in the world. And they have all heard the Laura Bush message about rescuing the women of Afghanistan from the Taliban oppression. And they go through this very interesting process in the class where they're very, they're outraged and offended, as I just described, and then they start to read some of the huge array of writings that are out there, both contemporary about the modern reveiling movement, and also historical texts that look at the unveiling movements in Egypt and Turkey and the forced unveiling in Iran and in the Soviet era, early Soviet era. And then they become advocates for the freedom of choice for women who choose to wear hijab. So that's an interesting stage. And then they're sort of in that empathic moment. And then the third step is where we begin to examine the question of choice and how choices are circumscribed for individuals in this society. And all of a sudden the light bulb goes off for them, the ways in which their world is limited by the choices that are available to them, just as that's the case for anyone in any historical context. So I find that a really interesting moment for students where they think of themselves as free. They live in a free society, and these women live in oppressive societies, including France, which comes off as quite restrained and restrictive in certain regards for them. And it causes them to reevaluate their own political role and freedom and choices in American society. And so I just wonder if other people have experiences like this and how you might use some of these historical moments to help them reflect on who they are as Americans today. Do you want to weigh in on
I'll say something. And I don't know that I have an answer to that, but I certainly encounter that problem of I teach at an institution where it's a very homogeneous student body. They're all very tan and mostly blonde. And, it's on the beach. And they've got a real complacency about their opportunity, their place and their opportunities in the world. And so a text that I'll offer them that describes constraints. Just, we talk about limited choices. I'm thinking about a text by Nicholas Terpstra that I've been teaching lately on lost girls. So I'm teaching a Renaissance course. The wall that I run up against is that complacency. Like that's in the past, that's somewhere else, and destabilizing that notion of their own constrained choices. I don't have that much success with, and I wonder if other people do. Do you take it on case studies? I think I can get students to, at some point, be critical, readers of the past, but and I think this is what engagement is about, is then the reason they should do that is so that then they can be critical citizens of their own time and place. I mean, that's my ultimate goal for them, is not to, as much as I do love chronology, and I was like, I want to play the chronology game, but I don't think that's what they're going to take away ultimately. What I want them to do is turn a critical eye on their own institutions.
So, we do talk about that in my class. I actually don't have a lot of trouble. My students often come into the class already with a sense that the United States is singular. For some of them, singularly bad, and for others of them, singularly good, but singular in either respect. But a collection of essays that I like a lot is Michael Ignatieff's American Exceptionalism and Human Rights, which his own introduction is about the sort of pattern of human rights causes that Americans do and don't take up and haven't taken up over time. And then there are essays on things like capital punishment, freedom of speech, international trade, countries where international legal decisions do make a difference, and countries where international legal decisions don't make a difference. There's an essay I teach a lot by Harold Coe, who's done both academic work and work with the State Department, which is called The Jekyll and Hyde of American Exceptionalism. And we take that very seriously as a literary metaphor, how Jekyll and Hyde are in fact exactly the same person, really. Can you have the good parts of exceptionalism without the bad parts of exceptionalism? Is it possible to take those apart or not? And that, on an academic level, I would say that works pretty well as a collection. But I think my students are pretty self-conscious to start with about what they do and don't have relative to other people. If anything, they probably think they have more relative to other people than in some cases they do, I think.
So, Naomi, the parallel I was thinking of, I've taught the Vail stuff, but I mean, not that much. But when I've taught class on the French Revolution, so the school I teach at, and that Lindsay teaches at, it's got a pretty big Catholic, it's a state school, but a lot of Catholic students. And so when I'm teaching the Revolution, and I teach it in a way that emphasizes the role that religion played, and with the civil constitution of the clergy sort of splitting the Revolution, and with a huge female representation in the opposition to the Revolution. And a lot of talk, a lot of descriptions at the time of women being, in their allegiance to the local priests. And this seems to hit home among Catholic students who will proceed to argue among themselves. Fascinating arguments for me to sit back and watch. That at times kind of dig like a little deeper even than I'm necessarily comfortable with in the classroom setting. But that was the best parallel that I've seen, because it really did let them argue about things that they wanted to argue about, that they're maybe a little more comfortable arguing over it in a historical context than they would be to just bring up these same
The
questions. with
displacement
their-
is actually what allows them to examine it in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say that.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I just point out that I have exactly the opposite problem in that, again, talk about class differences and experience differences. My problem with my students is to get them to see the opportunities that they can have, despite the fact that these are people for whom just clawing their way to the level of a state university, getting through, it's not unusual for me to have students who come in and say something like, well, we have students that we compare notes who are like living in their cars and going to school, or I just got beat up by the sheriff's deputies and that's why I couldn't make the exam, or all sorts of things. Single mothers who, with no child care, nobody take care of the kids while they're trying to come to class. So my goal is usually the opposite. It's to get them to see that they have opportunities and that there's reasons for them to go beyond just the practical, that there are ways that their lives can really be impacted for the better by thinking about some of these issues in a history course and pointing out where they are, and where they can go. So it's interesting to me to hear the range of different types of students people are dealing with.
And yeah, I would agree that in that case, we're facing the same problem that has been mentioned, where we have to overcome for our students the preconceptions of what studying French culture is about. And so we have this problem of high culture and low culture. And if we don't do our job of somehow bridging that, then we won't get to engagement. And I often have this I see, and I don't know if others of you have seen this, some students have a certain expectation. If they're going to take a History 393 seminar in France, they think we're going to be studying fine things, and that the whole purpose is to become they'll even joke, oh, well, I can't take that class, I'm just not sophisticated enough. When the real truth, if we tell the truth to them and we get them in, is that's actually, let's redress that. The purpose of this is to tell the truth. But it is difficult because we have these perceptions.
So we're very close to out of time. And I guess maybe, do any of the panelists want to say anything in closing up? No? Well, I just want to reiterate the invitation to send lesson plans and syllabi. We'll all post the syllabi for our courses. And I think, David, you said that there's going to be some kind of a repository created on H. France more generally.
H. France is in the midst of creating a syllabi repository for all types of courses, and we can make sure that this stuff has a place for you.
Okay, that's great.
Could I say just one final thing?
Please.
When I think back to political activism, the key theme that I always remember repeating was people should have the power to make the decisions that directly affect their lives. And one of the things I think that we need to convey to students is that history is empowering. Historical knowledge, critical historical thinking gives you the power not only to understand your own life, but to think analytically and not to listen to everything that you hear and accept it. And that is a radical political power. And I think without preaching values, it's probably a value that all of us are deeply committed to. And when students come to understand, hey, history helps me make sense of my life and gives me power, then it doesn't seem like tedious boredom. It seems like a path toward not only personal empowerment, but the empowerment of the community you live in.
Yeah, no, and I do think it's easy to make those connections. I mean, I just taught the Return to Martyr a few weeks ago, and propitiously, the week after, a story appeared on the internet about a young woman, a college student, whose mother had stolen her identity. Her mother asked her if she could take out a credit card in order to pay for her daughter's tuition to go to school. And the daughter, well, sure, I guess, you're helping me. But by the time she graduated from school, she discovered that her mother now had 5 credit cards in her name. And she was beginning to get a little worried about what this might do to her life if her mother quit paying the bills. So these kinds of things pop up that are wonderful for our students to then connect to what they've just read about from the 16th century.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for your